names a permanent chief.
The governor has signed off on the state's capital outlay budget passed by lawmakers in the 2023 legislative session.
But his signature didn't come without a few harsh words and several line-item vetoes to projects affecting us right here in Central Louisiana. Alina Noakes is in the studio with more on those impacts.
Yeah, guys, these cuts actually have a big impact here in Central Louisiana. Of 18 line-item vetoes, Governor Bel Edwards cut 11 projects in Cenla. The largest cut, $11.7 million, toward the Central Louisiana Juvenile Detention Center Authority in Grant Parish. State Representative Gabe Furman of Pollock said the cut is disappointing. It's his understanding the board authority expected the money was secure, calling the project shovel-ready. And out of Avoyles Parish, Edwards cut $3 million toward a parish recreation and education complex. The remaining 9 cuts all were to Vernon Parish projects, totaling more than $11 million. That includes funding for road improvements toward East Hawthorne Road, Tom Beacom Road, Bailey Road, Lake Vernon Road, and Spillway Road, as well as street rehab for Port Arthur Avenue in Anacoco. Cuts also went to water infrastructure projects in Anacoco, Hornbeck, and for the South Vernon Waterworks District 1. Money toward the Lions Club of Alexandria pool replacement in Vernon Parish were also vetoed. Vernon Parish lawmakers weren't happy with the cuts, as you'd expect. State Senator Mike Reese said he's now pivoting to look for other ways to fund the water projects. While Reese didn't suspect the governor's motivations in making the cuts, State Representative Chuck Owen felt the move to be retaliatory.
It's peculiar that he goes in and cuts things like roads in Anacoco, East Hawthorne Road, or a water project in Hornbeck or Anacoco or Rose Pine, and leaves cultural centers open in New Orleans and museums and athletic facilities. He leaves all sorts of other things in the construction project that are really marginally acceptable for the public good.
In his veto letter, Edwards said lawmakers overspent in their capital outlay bill, saying in part, quote, the overall magnitude of the bill as finally passed is far beyond the state's capacity to fund it in any reasonable way or amount of time. The intent of the capital outlay bill is to provide for a 5-year capital outlay budget. However, the general obligation bond portion of the enrolled House Bill 2 is well over a 10-year plan. The ballots to vote to call a veto override session will be sent out this week. If lawmakers move to override any bills, they'll go into session on July 18th. Owen is hopeful he can get fellow lawmakers on board to reverse some of those cuts to Vernon Parish projects. Brooke and Dylan, back to you.